Welcome back to Immersion Church. I'm Pastor Chris Solak. We have just 2 more weeks, this week and next week, as we wrap up the book of Hebrews. And last week, again, we were talking about this aspect of relationship. Really, the last 3 weeks, we've talked more and more about discipline and correction. Last week, we talked about being shook and that spiritual shaking that takes place within the earth and even within heaven. And it's the fact is that the Spirit is the only thing that isn't shook by the word and the presence of God. And so it is this constant move to shed what is temporal, what is ungodly, what is unrighteous, and to move into the fullness of the Spirit. And so it's important to understand that everything in the heavens and in the earth, everything that is part of the fallen creation is going to be shaken. And so we're carrying that concept forward in this message today. I've labeled this the same yesterday and forever. I'll let you figure out who we're talking about with that description. But Hebrews 13, 1 through 3 says this: let brotherly love continue. Don't neglect to show hospitality, for by doing this, some have welcomed angels as guests without knowing it. Remember the prisoners as though you were in prison with them, and mistreated as though you yourselves were suffering bodily. Well, again, this is this start here of chapter 13. It gets right in. The author is making this shift. There's been this creation, a continual thought of correction and discipline. And then this shift last week as this message continued to now say, okay, you're going to be shook. Be prepared to be shook. Be prepared to be corrected. And then now he's coming back and saying, now let's continue the ministry and the demonstration of relationship with God. For Jesus said, you are going to know my disciples by their love. And why is it so important that he uses this example of the prisoner, whether it be the physical prisoner or the spiritual prisoner or both? Why is it so important that prisoner, right? Why didn't he say demon possessed? Why didn't he talk about people who are sick? No, he uses the description of prisoner. And here's the thing. In this time, you would have had to go and visit prisoners. They didn't have commissaries and other things like they do today. And some prisoners had very few rights under Roman rule. And if you were a Roman citizen, at least you were guaranteed if you paid for it, you could bring in a physician, you could bring in food. This is why Paul had full access. He had people that would come in and care for him. He would have people who come in and bring him food. He would have people come in and bring him parchment and quill so that he could continue to write the revelations that God was giving him. Again, a lot of these perks and rights and abilities that Paul had, not everybody else had. Yet there is this focus here from the author in Hebrews to speak to this very direction, that why should we be focused on people who are prisoners? Well, because you and I once were enslaved the way they were enslaved, whether it was in the temporal world or whether it was in the spiritual realm, that at one point we were chained up and locked away and kept from the presence of God. And so from that standpoint, do not judge those brothers and sisters. You know, there were brothers and sisters that judged Paul for continually ending up in prison. There were people who called themselves Christians, even in the early church, that were upset that the Christians would go and preach the gospel and then would provoke the local magistrates, and the local magistrates would put them in prison. That not everybody was always okay with the provocative nature of the gospel in its own time, in its early infancy of declaration. Because Paul actually speaks to this in 1 and 2 Timothy. That some came and visited him in prison, some completely ignored him. People that had promised to do things for him completely ignored him. And I think it's very interesting here, the author of Hebrews is saying, from this point of perspective, we have all been a prisoner at some point to something, and that we must empathize. that we must carry on in brotherly love, that we must care for one another, and that we must also remember with all empathy where we have come through, what we have come from, what we have come through, and we must be radically generous in meeting the needs of our brothers and sisters who are going through the same things that we have had to endure. My first point this morning is that we must demonstrate the heart of the Messiah if we are in him, displaying brotherly love, hospitality, and have great empathy for those imprisoned physically and spiritually. You know, I've said this before, there is no discrimination in the Spirit. There is complete and total equality in the Spirit because we have all fallen short of the glory of God. Whether we are Jew or Gentile, free or slave, so to speak, whether we are man or woman. You know, there's a lot of people, you know, in the current church that say that if you're a woman that you can't, there's a lot that you can't do. There's a lot that God won't allow you to be, yet God speaks to all of us without discrimination because there is equality in the Spirit, and that the God of the impossible does not, he doesn't discriminate against sex. The word speaks very evidently that it's all about motive. And I could go through and we could spend the next 2 to 3 hours of me making one case after another, whether it's Paul or the early church or it's Jesus himself. Whether we want to go in to the story of Ruth, to the story of Esther, to the story of Rahab. We can go on and on and on and on about how God does not discriminate based on sex. Yet there are still people with doctrine and religion that claim Jesus Christ that would speak vehemently and venomously about God using all of his people. Because it's within the very nature of man to forget the forgiveness of God. And for some people, they've never truly accepted the sufficiency of the cross. And then when you don't accept the sufficiency of the cross and that you're still keeping score, you're still weighing one another's sins, that you have completely forsaken the words of Messiah, that all have fallen short of the glory of God. Even Jesus, speaking to the rich young ruler, when he comes up and he says, "Good teacher," he says, "Why do you call me good? Only God is good." Which was challenging the man. Are you calling me Messiah, or are you just kissing my tuchus? And we know from the story that he is just flattering him. It's empty flattery too, because he doesn't take Jesus seriously enough for it to create any kind of transcendence within his life. That when Jesus says, "I'm going to give you, hey man, if you really are what you say you are, you keep all the commandments," which is what he told Jesus, which was a very arrogant statement because no one could keep all the commandments. The commandments were put there to show you your sin, not your perfection. So he was delusional. Then Jesus said, "Well, then, hey man, this is going to be easy for you. Because if you keep all the commandments, then you don't have a spirit of pride, you have a spirit of humility. So here, go sell all your stuff, give it to the poor, and come follow me." Jesus knew the true motive of the man, that what he came for was not to give to God, but to take from God. And that he believed himself to be better. He didn't have a desire to serve people. He had a desire to be partnered to the one carrying authority, that, hey, I can elevate your status. Hey, I can provide value to you. Hey, and Jesus goes, "You want to provide value to me? Then sow into my kingdom. Go get rid of everything you owe, and you have immense wealth. Give it to the poor and come follow me." Then he turns around to the apostles when the dejected man goes away. He says, "It's easier for the camel to enter the eye of a pin than it is for a rich man to go to heaven." That's not a very encouraging statement. Why would that be? Because there's a belief that when you have much, that you have become a god of your own, and that maybe even sometimes your wealth, and I've heard this one many times, that your wealth is the stamp of approval, that somehow you are greater than. How can you be greater than if we have all fallen short of the glory of God? That means that we're all on the same even footing, that there is no moral hierarchy, and that includes me and Pastor Mark and Shannon, anybody. Just because we travel, just because we've laid hands on people in different countries, does that make us better than anybody? Absolutely not. And I would even make the argument that because we've been given those responsibilities, that we have a greater obligation to be aware of ourselves, the needs of others, and to be reconciled even closer to God out of necessity of what we have been called to. And that it requires greater empathy, greater compassion, greater forgiveness, sometimes greater understanding, which all flow from the heart of God, that none of us can do or be those things without Jesus and without great intimacy with Jesus. Don't worry, it gets more fun. Everybody loves this one. Hebrews 13, verse 4 says, marriage must be respected. Now catch this, by all. And the marriage bed kept undefiled, because God will judge immoral people and adulterers. Now, okay, marriage must be respected by all. What does that statement mean? Well, that means that we need to be respectful of the construct of marriage, what it actually represents, which is union with God, but also to be sensitive to one another and the weaknesses within one another. And that if you are following God in the Spirit, you will continue to get direction that will keep you out of being a stumbling block for other people and other people being a stumbling block for you. And that everybody will stay in their lane according to the Spirit. If you get into your flesh, all kinds of crazy stuff's going to happen. Because when people are in their flesh and they're giving themselves over to the flesh, then now the flesh's desires are going to manifest. So when we read this here in 13:4, this is coinciding with what the author was speaking to, talking about everything on earth and heaven being shaken, because staying committed to your family, your church, your body, your faith, your marriage, whether you're actually married or you're not married, means that to say that you're going to show respect by the Spirit to those who have been called into marriage. Of course, Paul was never called into marriage. So some people are not called into marriage. And so they need to be respected for what God has called them to do. Just because, geez, when we went to the Philippines, and I tease about this, has come up a few times in the last few weeks. I mean, nobody could get it through their mind that Shannon was not married. Like, it was like, and people had to like go out of their way. Why aren't you married? It's like none of your business. Respect the decision. Respect the fact that God has called her to this place. That marriage must be respected by all. Whether you're single or you're married, we should all respect the sanctity of what marriage is. If we do that, then all of a sudden the crazy nonsense gets to be less crazy nonsense. But we must also, and this is important, we must respect everyone. For those who are single called to that purpose, they have a more unique call with the Lord. Paul had a very unique call with the Lord. The people that I have known that have not married because God was leading them in a very specific direction, they have a very specific kind of intimacy with Jesus. And I have heard this from people like Mother Teresa, But there's a lot of other people that I've heard it from as well that sowed into the ministry, knowing that some of them had been married and been in ministry and their husband had died. Well, they continued to walk in a specific way with Jesus. I've heard of other people who have lost their wives and their children, missionaries that lost their wives and their children on ship voyages, never remarried, stayed, but talked about the closeness of God. Like, don't judge another brother's call, right? We've got this under the new covenant as well. Don't judge another sister's call. But be respectful. And this is to say, and I want to just come into this because the marriage construct is the body of Christ. Go read Ephesians chapter 5 and 6. Like I said, a lot of this week and next is going to start to sound a lot like Ephesians. Some of it's going to sound like 1 Timothy. Some of it's going to sound like Galatians. And it's just a consistency of what the church leaders knew about spiritual activity, that they were handing it off generationally. And what Paul wrote in his time, again, this is coming a few years afterwards. This is a little further down the line into the Messianic church. So it's just very important that immorality and adulterous behavior, whether that be adulterous with God or adulterous relationally, has to do with the difference between carnality and spirit. And that if you allow yourself to be corrected, you allow yourself to be shaken, that these things will never become a part of the equation. If the focus is on God, you're going to reap a godly response. If your focus is on the flesh, you're going to reap a sinful response. And this is just the appeal one more time. Number one, we just had this caution, hey, to stay in the mindset of love, hospitality, and empathy. But also, don't disrespect the sanctity of relationship that God has created within the earth, that His design would live vivaciously within the church. Church with a strong family units built into its dynamic is a church that cannot be destroyed. Yet, you find churches that are splitting and falling apart and breaking down. How many times? You know, some of us grew up in the more traditional places. I grew up in more of the traditional places. There were other churches we would hear about that would, be breaking up, or ministries disintegrating due to infidelity. It's a disintegration point. It's a degeneration point. And it's that born of the flesh, not what is that born of the Spirit. So my second point, marriage is a demonstration of how we live in relationship with God. This is, again, if we're focused on the Spirit, we're going to reap a spiritual result. But most importantly, that if we're focused on God and the Spirit, we're going to continue to reap a godly result. And that we are in a time where we cannot afford to mess around anymore. And to think that in this time that you all can take an idea, right? That you and I could actually take an idea and say, you know what, I'm just going to put myself in the center of it. That is a very dangerous idea in the time that you and I have been placed in. Yet, we are in the great day of the lover of self. That it will be as if in the days of Noah once again, that people, fundamentally it says, people, the first thing it says is that people will be lovers of self. That's permeated the church. Doesn't have to permeate our church. And that we can develop and we can strengthen our marriages, our relationships, our family dynamic within the presence of God. How can we do that? By familiar love, family love, right? Or brotherly love, hospitality with one another. What do? We always break bread at Immersion Church. Why? Because God said to do so. Why? Because hospitality is at the very nature of the heart of God. And we do it and we feast in his honor. Okay. And then we must show one another empathy. You know, sometimes we have to be long-suffering with one another. You know, what God's trying to do with each and every one of us. Sometimes it doesn't happen like that. Sometimes it takes 6 months. Sometimes it takes a year. Sometimes it takes 10 years. You know, I share this one story that a guy sat in a small group for years and years and years and years, and there were moments along the way where Jesus was trying to reach him. And finally, after 5 years of sitting in small group, made the phone call one day and said, hey, I want to receive the baptism of Messiah. I want to receive the fullness of the presence of God. It's like, I'll never forget taking that phone call and getting off the phone and going, Jesus, what changed? And he said, just decided today was going to be the day. Yet no one judged that person. No one came to that person. You know, we really need to sit down and talk. I'm really concerned about your eternal future. I'm really concerned about where you are in your spiritual walk. You know, and I grew up in a lot of traditional churches where they didn't have a problem putting somebody on blast. And they would put people on blast and those people would disappear. And what it's very interesting as a pastor over the last 7 years, as I've done relational ministry, Mark and I both have found this, that is, there have been issues within the church. Very few times has God actually used us as the point of confrontation. What do you want me to do with that? Do you want me to speak to that? Do we need to go sit down with this person? No. Let me deal with it. If I need you, I will let you know. You know how much peace God has reaped out of that posture? And here's the thing. We understand our support role in that, and that is the same support role that you have as a member of Immersion Church, is that when in doubt, and doubt's the wrong word, when not sure exactly what to do, because it's not a matter of doubt, it's just saying, I'm not exactly sure what I'm to do with where this person is at. You know what you do with them? You love them. You care for them. You understand. You don't judge them. And that you respect the fact, come back to respect where they are at in the process, with the hope that God will continue to communicate and they will receive from the Lord, and that God will use you when necessary in that process to bring about not only clarity, but ultimately real, true relationship. This is what it means to care for one another, not just as a community of strangers, but as a group of people familiar in spirit that have a desire to see God's will not just done for themselves, but for everyone in the community. That is the meaning of church. My hope isn't just for my family. My hope is for the entire community, that we would come together in unity and trust that God could set us all ablaze to care and love for one another as He desires to. And that we would all be sensitive enough to demonstrate that. Hebrews 13:5-8 says it this way: your life should be free from the love of money. Be satisfied with what you have, for He Himself has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Therefore, we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Remember your leaders who have spoken God's word to you. As you carefully observe the outcome of their lives, imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This is again to bring this in to eternal focus. That what the author of Hebrews has taken us through from week to week and landing on correction and discipline, and ultimately with disobedience, punishment. And then to say, hey, look, you're not just going to be corrected in just the flesh, you're also going to be corrected in the spirit. And to say that if you are not focused on the spirit, you're going to be shaken. But here's the idyllic viewpoint for community and relationship in a spiritual sense of unity with God. Which leads me to my third and final point. The contentment comes from a life lived in the Spirit. And hold on to the help of the Lord, for He is always present and is eternally consistent. This comes right back to what I was talking about, to rely on Jesus. Jesus, what is my role as the pastor? What is my role within the community when it comes to this issue? How do you want me to handle it? Because it's not Chris's church. It's not Paul's church. It's not Mark's church. It's his church. Again, if God is leading our lives, then we must again have His direction. I would challenge you this week to go before the Lord and ask Him, how would you have me care for the community? How would you have me care for the people within the community? Is there anything that you would want me to do that I am not doing? The Lord may tell you, no, you're doing everything I want you to do. And He may tell you, you know what? I want you to do this, or this. This exercise is not to get you to do more within the church. What it is to reconcile yourself to God within the context of the responsibility of community. I truly believe our body is going to grow. I truly believe that the responsibilities upon our ministry, not just Immersion Church, but faith-based ministries, is going to greatly expand and expand soon. That God is preparing the hearts of our leadership and for those around our ministry that have taken on leadership roles in part, and that God wants to bring them into a deeper and more a place of greater refreshment. I know that already because He has spoken it. But we are now entering into that season. We are coming by finishing this study. This study was to be the preparation for that moment. So it is now time to reconcile. It's that if you haven't already come to these conclusions over the last 28 weeks, now is the time to get your mind and your heart set in this direction. And so with that, there's a whole lot of new things that are on the horizon for, I believe, our community, and then for each and every one within our community, whether you're already doing all the things that God's asked you to do, or that there is just this whole new layer of intimacy that as He gives you direction and that you live it out, that the connection between you and heaven will strengthen, not only building our community here at Immersion Church, but also building the kind of personal relationship, family relationship, marital relationship that you already are working on with the Lord, that it would get stronger, that it would get deeper, and that your life would rest more securely upon Him. Until next week, be blessed.